It's lovely to see you. You're looking radiant today. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm feeling really good this morning. I've been looking forward to talking to you today.
Thank you. That's really nice. Not many people say that, so I appreciate that. So listen, before we get cracking on understanding a bit more about your topic and your expertise and how you help organizations, tell me how you personally got interested in artificial intelligence.
Well, I think this started when I was in high school because I've always been interested in the STEM subjects. So when I was going to choose my profession, it was, should I become a medical doctor or should I do something else? And then I ended up not becoming a medical doctor, but studying medical physics. And that's when it started, really, this interest of connecting data with how the world works. And so when I finished my master's degree in engineering, I started working in the consulting industry. And then, of course, I wasn't in the lab killing rats and studying cells, but I was talking to business leaders about what kind of outcome, but it's all about how do you use those data. And then I decided that if I was going to continue working in the consulting industry or in business in general, I needed to have a few more business subjects. So I went on to study at Warwick Business School, and I took a master's degree in operational research, which is really about understanding how data in a value chain can be used to understand what's going on and how to support the management on their decisions. And basically that's what, 20 something years ago. We didn't talk about machine learning at that time, but we did talk about optimization. Now, 20 something years later, we talk about machine learning, but the topics and the subjects are really almost the same. We have just added a few more new technologies to it. And so, yeah, that's the red thread from I started my career to where I am today.
That's fascinating. You were sort of like a bit ahead of your time, weren't you, really? Sort of, you know, who could foresee that this would become such a hot topic? I mean, it is such a hot topic now. Everybody is talking about artificial intelligence. So what's your position? Have you got a unique take on the topic?
Well, let me just comment on this notion of being a bit ahead. I just remember this morning that 10 years ago, I was talking to my boss, then working in the insurance industry, about the use of psychographic data in customer relationship management in insurance. And he said, nah, the union is not going to accept this, it's too complicated, nah, not going to happen. Yes, well, 10 years later, that's where we are. So my unique take, I've been working in the consulting industry for a few years now. So basically through my entire career, I've been either on the buying side or the delivering side of consultancies. And I have been one of those who have been both buying and selling those pink clouds with a little bit of fairy dust on. And then over the maybe last couple of years, I started looking back and said, okay, what actually happened? What were the consequences of what we were selling? And so my take on it now is let's be pragmatic, because there are so many opportunities around how we can use data to create a better understanding and an insight into the business and the organization and the world and the climate and whatever. And we can use these data combined with new technologies and machine learning, and let's call it artificial intelligence, to automate and to support human decision making. But my focus is very much on the pragmatic, what's here right now.
What's here right now? What's under our noses? What can we do? That is so important, because often some speakers will talk about things that are untouchable. You can't do anything. It's not practical. It's not pragmatic. Sorry, I interrupt you. Carry on.
No, I was going to add those. And let's also look a few years ahead, but still keep here and now in the back of our minds.
Yeah, so starting where we are, start from where you are in order to get to. And I love the fact that you are a bit of a futurist. I might have to ask you at the end what you think is going to happen in the next 10, 20 years, because you do seem to have that vision. Well done. To explain what you think artificial intelligence is really all about.
Well, to me, it is about applying mathematical recipes, what we call algorithms, to a large amount of data that we have created somehow. To me, this is an extension of the big data we talked about 10 years ago, the digital transformation we have talked about over the last decade and we're still so much in the middle of. And this AI thing, basically here and now, it's about how do we actually utilize those data for something useful with the technologies we have available. So it's basically about using mathematics to identify patterns in the data we have to somehow predict a future outcome or future behavior. That simple and that complicated.
I like that. And I like mathematical recipes. I love that. I'm going to use that. That an algorithm is a mathematical recipe. That just makes it so, it makes it visual for me, actually. I quite like that. So we talk about bias as well. You talk about bias being a huge problem. How is it a problem for us when we're dealing with data, when we're dealing with AI?
We tend to blame the algorithms. We tend to blame the technology, but that is the wrong path. Now, the source here lies in what I just said. AI is about applying mathematical recipes to a large amount of data. The data, that's where the problem is. Because how did that amount of data come to life? Or where does it come from? Who created it? We did. We as humans created those data through our behavior over years, maybe decades. And when we use mathematical algorithms or recipes to find patterns in those data, we are actually training the mathematical algorithms to replicate human behavior, human ways of thinking, human decision-making, which means we are also automizing human stupidity to a large extent. And that's where bias is a problem. Because it's our biases that are just ingrained in those data. And there are so many examples of that. The Amazon case of recruitment, we see it in legislation or law enforcement. We can see it in credit scoring. There are so many examples where we say, well, this isn't really fair, this isn't really good, because there's a bias here, gender, ethnicity, whatever kind of bias we don't really like. Well, it's because we as humans did this first, and then we trained the algorithm to just do what we did. Wasn't good, no. But the problem is we are just standing in front of a huge mirror, and what we see is the mirror image of ourselves, but not the prettiest version of ourselves.
Wow, that's a bit scary, isn't it? Automating human stupidity. That's incredibly scary. And the fact that it's a mirror is interesting. Can it be solved?
Yes, it can be solved, at least to a large extent, not completely. As long as we humans continue to behave in not so fair, rational, clever ways, we will continue to create those biases, right? But we can mitigate it to a large extent by being aware of the problem, by being aware of the fact that it is our own human behavior that is creating those biases. And then by looking at the data in advance and actually working through the data properly, compliance, transparency, you know, all these big words that might feel a bit complicated, but really that is what we need to do. We need to understand our data and need to be sure that the data we actually feed to the mathematical recipes is worth feeding to the algorithms. Right? And this is also where the coming legislation from the European Union points out the need for governance, for transparency, for compliance, because it is really about preventing that we use bad data, to put it in a tabloid way.
Okay, wow, that's a big topic, isn't it? And I suppose it's a big deal, and it's fascinating. But something else you talk about that I would like to know more about is you say that digital is not necessarily sustainable. So first of all, I want to know what you mean by digital not being sustainable, and also why you're focusing on digitalization here and not AI. So you've sort of moved. Tell me about that.
Well, I haven't really moved. It's more about not being so specific that people don't really listen to me, because the topic is still the same. So why do I talk about digital not being sustainable? Well, we tend to think that anything digital is sustainable because these data are just floating wirelessly around in the air, right? Not leaving any footprints. But that's wrong. They are indeed leaving footprints. And when I talk about sustainability here, my focus is primarily two things. So one is the electricity needed to actually operate anything digital. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not only talking about artificial intelligence, but also other digital technologies, such as blockchain and cryptocurrencies, virtual reality, gaming, metaverse. Yes. So a bit more than just artificial intelligence. And the other side of it is that we tend to forget that anything digital has a hardware end somewhere, or even a hardware beginning, because we have smartphones, we have computers, we have a whole lot of sensor technologies, we have smart watches, sensors in the lighting and the heating and the cooling of the rooms. We have cars full of sensors. They are everywhere, cameras, but also servers, data centers, gaming computers, monitors, TVs, all these hardware elements related to our digital transformation. They have a huge environmental cost for our planet. And we forget that. In 2021, the world produced nearly 58 million metric tons of electronic waste. That is more than the total weight of the Chinese wall in 1 year. And about half of that is smartphones. And we're not really recycling very much of it. A tiny bit of it is recycled. But for now, we are not really good at recycling electronic waste. And where does it end up? Well, it ends up in dump sites in Africa, for example, in Ghana on Agbogbloshie, which is the largest dump site in the world for electronic waste. And it becomes really toxic waste. And let's move back to the manufacturing process. So actually, as much as 80% of the environmental footprint of electronic devices is related to the manufacturing process, which is a really dirty process, actually. Requires a lot of electricity, a lot of clean water, creates a lot of waste. It involves a lot of precious metals. And we're also digging a lot of big holes in this planet to produce simple things as smartphones, right? So anything digital requires that we are actually doing mining several places around the world. So when I hear people talking about how AI can heal the world and there will be no mining and there will be no child labor and there will be no poverty, that is so wrong, because anything digital has a hardware end, and that hardware end is created using metals. And those metals, they are dug out of the ground. The garbage is handled by, to a large extent, children. So right now, 18 million children are in immediate risk, or health risk, severe health risk, because of working in this informal electrical waste management industry. Why? Because their hands are nimble. It's easier for them to pick apart a smartphone than for a grown man. Houston, we have a problem.
Wow, that is shocking. I didn't realize it was quite so big a problem. Ooh, so what can we do about it? I suppose we have to be responsible about our recycling, maybe not change our devices as often, but
Yes.
it's a bigger problem, isn't it? I think this is sort of like an education piece where you've really got to go and talk to some of these actual manufacturers of the hardware, and we've got to get you in there just to educate them.
I think also every business leader can do something. And so one of the things, like maybe step one, is start by requiring that all your data in any data center is processed using green power. So at least let's help the data center providers in their transition towards renewable energy. That's not enough, but it's an important first step. The other thing is create a culture of computational efficiency. Start creating awareness in your company about the fact that every email you send leaves a footprint. Every email you don't delete and just leave in your inbox creates a footprint. Every data point created leaves a footprint. Maybe as a marketing department, you shouldn't send all those newsletters to all those people if they actually never really care that much. Or maybe you shouldn't save all those data. As much as 90% of the data we collect, they are never used after 3 months. So maybe we don't need to save all those data all that time because it's just stacking up in enormous amounts. Maybe you don't need to run your algorithms that many times during training just because you wanted to check if it worked or if it got any better. Maybe you should think about what is good enough. Can we be smarter in how we develop and how we train our algorithms? Can we be smarter in how we build our code so that it runs more efficiently? There are so many things one can do to create this computational efficiency. And include that in the ESG reporting. I mean, that's simple and that complicated, but still something you can actually do right now. There are tools in the market, open source as well, that can help you calculate what is the actual footprint of your calculations. And then the third part, make sure that you reuse the hardware for as long as you can. And when you need to change it, then do it in a safe and secure way. And maybe find a partner that can actually take over part of the value chain of the hardware, such as the smartphones of the company. There are companies out there, such as the Norwegian company TechStep, that can actually help you with the value chain. And when your company are done with those smartphones after 2 or 3 years, companies like TechStep, they take over, they fix them, and they sell them to a next generation of users because they're still usable, right? Everybody saves money. We save the planet, a bit at least. Another generation of users can get a smartphone a little bit cheaper. Everybody wins. So those are 3 examples. We could probably talk about a few more, but at least let's start somewhere. And this is something that all leaders can do right now. Just do it.
Fantastic. I love that. And actually, you're making me think about, I've got a lot of data that I keep, in the cloud that I probably don't need to. So I might have a little bit of a clear and a cull. And often you get overwhelmed by the amount of stuff you keep, and you keep it. And you're right in terms of, after 3 months, a lot of that data isn't used. You are absolutely right. And obviously I'm a small part of this problem, but if everybody like me did something about it, it would all mount up. That's phenomenal. Thank you. That's really made me think. So apart from this, and apart from AI and many other topics, you actually cover quite a range of topics. So tell me about the kinds of audiences and what they're asking for you to speak about, and how you make sure it's relevant to them.
So typically I speak to leaders in various industries that need to understand more about data-driven technologies, such as artificial intelligence and the metaverse. Very often I start by educating them a little bit in a nice way. But even if the consulting industry has done a lot to tell about these technologies to the market, people are still not really completely understanding what this is about. So my role is, number 1, to educate. Number 2 is to raise the awareness around the flip side of digital transformation. So maybe not so much more talking about the amazing opportunities and the pink clouds. Well, I do talk about opportunities, but I try to be a bit more right here, right now, what can we actually do? But I very often find my role to be to talk about what is the flip side, what is the challenge that we are getting ourselves into on behalf of this planet through our digital transformation. And then we're talking about sustainability, which we already talked quite a bit about, but also the issue of responsibility or ethics. But I prefer to talk more about responsibility rather than the philosophical issue of ethics. Yes.
Great.
And then, yeah.
I've written down that the flip side of digital transformation. I think that's such a good line, because we always, everybody always talks about the positive, and it's rare to have someone talking about, hang on a minute, let's look at the other side. So I think that is a really unique take that you have. So Elin, you have this ability to think about what's coming next. What's coming next for you in terms of what you're doing in terms of your work and your topic areas?
Well, I think my role is to always be a little bit ahead and challenging our beliefs. So when the market moves and the leaders understand more, they embrace technologies and maybe also embrace more the issues of sustainability and responsibility, I will continue moving a few steps ahead. There will always be new issues. And metaverse is one such good example. We just started talking about it in the market. I do get requests around, so what is this metaverse? Can you tell us what it's going to be? Well, actually, my answer is no, I can't, because nobody knows, but I can tell you a little bit about what are the components, what are the visions that are being painted for this metaverse, what are the huge challenges that we are also seeing, and what do I think is going to happen in the next few steps? And I think that's also where we're going to see artificial intelligence moving, because yes, there's many use cases that we still haven't utilized within artificial intelligence, but scientists are aware of those. So it's more about actually getting it done. What is the next level? Well, there's a lot of research going on within AI, but it's mostly just the next few steps of how can we do things a little bit better. The real breakthrough will be when we have a completely new generation of processing power, because then we can do so much more. But that is still a few years ahead, talking about quantum computing. And then the whole metaverse discussion levels up the discussion around AI as well, because it is just the next league, basically, of data or processing of opportunities and challenges. It's like multiplying everything.
Okay, sounds a bit scary to me, but it also sounds fascinating. What a fascinating world you live in. Elin, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed yourself, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And thank you for listening to The Speaker Show. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please make sure you leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. You can keep up with future episodes on the Speakers Associates website, which is speakersassociates.com, or your favorite podcast app. And if you would like to invite Elin to speak at your next conference or event, please contact Speakers Associates in plenty of time to book her, because I know she's very busy and you don't want to be disappointed. So I will see you all next week. Bye-bye for now.